Welcome back, friends. According to the federal government, small businesses, and there are 14 million of them, employ 50% of the workforce, produce 44% of America's goods and services, and create, get this, all of the new jobs. Our guest is making a valiant attempt to link up small businesses throughout America through his organization. Gordon Bizar is our guest. He's president of the International Business Network. It's good to have you here tonight.
Pleasure to be here, Dennis.
From those statistics, small business is really big business, isn't it?
Well, it is to us. We have about 8,000 of them in our membership now. And in fact, we did a little study to determine what the purchasing power of our 8,000 members were. And
this is in your network, right?
Right, and it turns out that our members have the purchasing power of the 20th largest corporation in America.
Is that true?
So yeah, that's just 8,000 of our members.
It would appear that if there are 14 million American small businesses, how many people are we talking about involved?
Well, clearly you mentioned that we employ 50% of the nation's workforce as collective small business.
Okay, so then now we're talking about 70 million people?
Half of America literally is involved in small business, either by owning one, working in one, or being a dependent of somebody who works in one.
So this is the backbone of America. You know, everybody's perception is that big business is running America. I would say that small business is kind of running America.
No, it's the tail wagging the dog story, because big business is extremely well organized. They have the lobbyists, they have the financial clout, they have the concentration of power. The small business person is independent, he's not politically motivated. At least he hasn't been in the past. That's one of the things we're working very hard to change.
Is that because he's so tied up, or she's so tied up in running the business?
You bet. Well, not only that, it's the nature of the small business person anyway. A person who goes into his own business is independent by nature. He's not a joiner. He's historically a person who solves his own problem. He rolls up his sleeves, he pitches in, he gets the job done. He's not the joiner. He's not the guy who goes out and holds signs in front of his congressman's office. He just doesn't work that way.
There was a presidential report that came out recently about small businesses. Are there some trends there? Are there some contributions? Are there some things that we know about from that report?
Well, there's a lot of things that report had to say. One of the things that's very interesting, that's a trend right now, is a tremendous increase in home businesses. What's happened is people who work for big companies are finding that in order to supplement their income, they're starting little businesses in their homes, working out of their garages, and that's a very significant trend. There's also a general trend towards decentralization in general. The small business is growing in leaps and bounds. They're picking up at the rate of 2 to 1 every job that's lost by big business. Small business is picking up new jobs at the rate of 2 to 1. Also, another interesting fact about the small business is that they contribute to employment at the place that it's needed. People who are young in the job market and old in the job market, people who are part-timers, are being picked up by the small business. The small business is more flexible. It can adjust to the needs of the workforce, whereas big business is usually more structured, more organized. It requires the workforce to conform to them.
Okay, now when we talk about small business, we're not only talking about people, jobs, organizations with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, are we? What's the cutoff line when we're talking about a small business?
Well, technically a small business is 500 employees or less. But of the nation's 14 million small businesses, almost 12 million of them have less than 50 employees.
So okay, that's a good number to work with.
Yeah,
okay.
So you're really talking about pretty small business when you get down to 50 employees or less.
Okay, this whole business of small business, what makes them successful? What do you see that really makes them take off and work?
Well, there's the entrepreneurial spirit more than anything else. It's no matter what government does to them, they survive anyway. For years, the policies of our government in particular have been very oppressive to the small business community.
Like what?
Well, they've been overtaxed, overregulated. See, as an example, if you were to take a big business, a large company, and you have the imposition of a government regulation, the big business has a bureaucratic structure within it, which now deals with the bureaucratic structure of the large government, and they somehow get along with each other. They make it work. When regulation imposes itself upon a small business person, he ends up in the position of having to deal with the regulations himself. And so you take the most productive person in the business and you take him away from the problems of running his business and into the problems of interfacing with government. And bureaucrats and entrepreneurs don't mix. They're like gasoline and water. And so as a result, a lot of productivity is lost through regulating small businesses or trying to regulate small businesses.
What's the biggest mistake people make when they're trying to start a business?
When they're trying to start a business, the biggest mistake they make is trying to start one.
Why?
As opposed to buying one.
Oh.
One of the things that,
okay.
that I spend a good deal of my time doing is going around the country, teaching people how it is that they can buy businesses as opposed to start them. For example, Dennis, when you go to start a business, many people start it by first of all putting their life savings into the business.
Sure.
They borrow money from friends, from relatives, only to find out that they haven't set aside enough cash, even with all of that, and the business fails before it ever gets off the ground because it was undercapitalized from the very beginning.
And that's a common mistake.
A very common mistake. The second problem that you have when you start a business is nobody gives you credit. It's your cash that has to buy all your inventory, your furniture, your fixtures, open your location, do your advertising, hire your personnel. And all that money goes out before your business starts to really go and the money starts coming back. Plus, it takes a lot of time to start a business. For example, most people find that it'll take 2 to 3 years of blood, sweat, and tears before their business turns profitable and starts supporting them. So that's 3 years of money going out and hard work before the money actually starts coming back. Also, it's very risky to start a new business. The statistics tell us that 80% of all new businesses fail before they're 2 years old. 90% never see their 5th birthday. On the other hand, it is possible for a person to buy someone else's already successful business, to buy it with none of their own cash, even if they have no established credit. It's possible to be in that business within 6 weeks from the day that they start looking for it. It is possible to buy that business and have a positive cash flow right from the day that you buy it, and it's possible to do it with no risk on the basis of 2 reasons. One is you buy a business that's more than 5 years old and already has a substantial track record. And second, there are techniques that you can use to insulate yourself from the risk in case the business does fail. And before the end of the program, I'll go through some of those with you, show you exactly how this is done.
Let me ask the folks at home to jump into the conversation. Gordon Bizar is our guest. I want you to grab a pencil and paper because toward the end of our conversation, we're going to put you in touch through an address that I'm going to give you with his company, which is the International Business Network. And they got a couple of nifty services that you might want to know about and get some literature on. And we have been telling you during the last few days that anything on the starting, the buying, the expanding of a small business would be fair game. And also in the time that we have, we're going to talk a little bit about the politics involved, because I gather that small business does not get much of a shake with the federal government, huh?
Not near as much as it should. And again, it's not by design. There's no one in federal government out there hurts small business. It's just small business historically is unorganized, and so there is no single voice that really speaks for small business. And so the problem is hearing small business.
Let's take advantage of the time, and since obviously when you get on a roll, you can dispense an awful lot of good information in a short amount of time without me having to interrupt you with all the questions. And pick up on the thread that you were just talking about of suggesting that it's better to buy than to start a business from scratch, and just maybe use the next couple of minutes to formulate in your mind the questions that come into your hotline, the questions that you get at your seminars of people who are interested in this business of doing something as an entrepreneur.
Well, Dennis, probably the best way to lead into this is to share with you the experience I had in buying my first company. I was a few years out of school. I did not have a lot of money, but I found a small manufacturing company that I wanted to buy. And I chatted with the owner for a while, and he told me he wanted $500,000 for the company. Well, to a young fellow, those are telephone numbers, never mind dollars. But I really wanted this business very, very badly. And so over a period of 2 or 3 months, I negotiated with him. And finally, he agreed to sell me the business for $150,000 cash down. And the balance, $350,000, he agreed that I could pay him that in the form of an installment note and make the payments to him over a period of 7 years. Now, from looking at the profitability of the business, I knew that from the profits of the business, I could meet the payments on the note. My problem was, where did I get the $150,000 of upfront cash? I did a lot of research, and I found out that there were lenders out there that are called asset-based lenders, and that once I owned the company, I could go to these asset-based lenders and pledge the assets that were within the business itself as collateral for a loan. Now, in this company that I wanted to buy were $300,000 worth of machinery and equipment, accounts receivable, and inventory. And once I owned the company, these asset-based lenders would loan me up to 80% of their value, or $240,000. My problem, however, was that I didn't have the $150,000 to buy the business so that I could take the assets within the business and pledge them to the asset-based lenders. But I did a little more research, and I found out that I could go to a bank and get what's called a swing loan. In other words, borrow $150,000 from the bank in the morning, give that to the seller, which would now make the business mine. Then in the afternoon, go to the asset-based lender, pledge the assets that were within the business that I just bought, raise the $240, and then from the $240 immediately repay the bank their $150, leaving me with $90,000 in the company to use as working capital to build it. But as luck would have it, Dennis, when I went to my banker and explained this grand plan to him, he looked at me over the top of his horn-rimmed glasses and he said, you know, Mr. Bizar, he says, that's a great plan that you have here, but you know, you don't have any credit rating with us that would even remotely warrant a $150,000 loan. Well, I smiled at him and I said, you know, Mr. Banker, I thought you might say that. So I just want you to know that I'm going to set it up so your loan to me will be totally risk-free. In fact, the money will never leave your hands. And the way we did it is we set up what's called a double escrow. In other words, the banker put his $150,000 into escrow A. And when escrow A closed, the money was released directly to the seller, and that made the business mine. In the meantime, I had the asset-based lenders put their $240,000 into escrow B. When escrow B closed, $150,000 was released directly to the bank to repay their loan. The other $90,000 came to me. The banker in his trust department held both escrows, and both escrows closed simultaneously. So the banker was never out his money even for a second. And on that basis, I didn't need to have a good credit rating to get that loan. And Dennis, the significance of the technique that I just described to you is that anybody, whether he has a credit or not, who wants to own a business of his own can do it with none of his own cash if he just knows the simple keys that make it possible. And that's a very significant fact.
Hi there, you're on Late Night America.
Good evening, Dennis. This is Pete from Boonton, New Jersey.
Go ahead, Pete.
I would like to ask Mr. Bizar how he would recommend starting a business in the form of whether it should be a corporation or whether it should be an individual or a partnership.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to point out that any business that I ever start, even though it has no income at all on the day that it might be started, I would always start it as a corporation. And I know a lot of accountants and attorneys disagree with that. They say, well, you shouldn't do that until you have a certain amount of income. The real benefit of forming a corporation is it insulates you from unlimited liability. Your liability is only the amount of investment that you actually make in your corporation. The significance of that is that if you do make a mistake in the starting of your business and it turns out that it doesn't work out the way that you thought it would, the only thing you've risked is what you've invested in your corporation. Otherwise, if you do it as a partnership or if you do it as a sole proprietor, you risk all your assets if the business loses money.